Now recording, and I will share my screen. Okay.
All right, everyone, thank you. Walter, a reporter here, and Amy Julia Harris, another reporter. And for, what is it, more than 2 years now you guys have been looking into this issue? It's been more than 2 years that these two have been reporting on work-based rehabs across the US. That is, rehabs that either force or coerce or require residents to work for free in exchange for treatment. And as these two have found and reported thoroughly in different states and different cities, this is an issue that sort of has begun to kind of take off in the midst of the opioid crisis. And even though it may not necessarily be the case that the very act of asking someone to work in exchange for rehab is improper, though it may be, they've found time and time again that these sort of rehabs are, this particular model of rehab tends to open the door to malfeasance. And they've seen that play out in various ways again and again and again. So before we get into the network and how it applies to local reporters in New Jersey especially, I thought that I would open it up to Amy, Julia, and Sho, who can kind of zoom out a little bit, give you a little bit of history on how they came across this topic, talk a little bit about the reporting they've done in various local regions and some of the impact that came from it. So I'll ask Joe to get to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Shoshana.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'd like to say I'm really excited about this because I'm actually from New Jersey, so it's really cool to hear about the efforts you all are partaking in. But basically, how Amy, Julie, and I got started on this story is we were kind of newly assigned to a state courts beat looking at court systems across the country. And we were particularly intrigued about the treatment shortage, the shortage of drug treatment for people struggling with alcohol and drug abuse. So we started looking at drug courts and wanted to know where drug courts were sending people for treatment, especially considering the shortage of affordable treatment options out there. And you know, at first we started hearing about some kind of more interesting programs that are very religious, kind of coercive in nature. And we wanted to try to find a state with a really good courts database that we could use to kind of do an analysis and figure out where courts were sentencing people for drug treatment, how frequently they were sentencing people for drug treatment, and to follow up on the names of particular programs. So Amy, Julie, and I spent a lot of time kind of researching state courts databases to see how thorough they were, how detailed they were, and ultimately we stumbled across Oklahoma's state courts database, which is very, very thorough. It's all online. The dockets are very detailed in showing where judges are sentencing people for drug treatment. And we were literally, I was using advanced Google search. It's like a particular search technique you can use in Google to search Oklahoma's state courts database for the names of particular rehab programs. In this case, I was looking for rehab programs that included the word Christian. So I performed the search and up popped all these dockets listing the many, many times that judges in Oklahoma had sent people to a drug rehab called Christian Alcoholics and Addicts in Recovery. I just started doing a brief background of this program, and actually it was not hard to figure out that this was a one-year program in rural Oklahoma that was Christian in nature. They were requiring people to attend Bible study every week and church every week. And also that they were requiring people to work in chicken processing plants. And that the program was founded by a former poultry industry executive. where the rehab participants were potentially working. So that kind of opened a new door, a new reporting avenue for us. We started digging into that as our main story. And I'll let Amy Julia take it from here as to what we found.
Do you want the next slide?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Next slide, please, Joe. Thank you.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Julia. Very excited to talk to you all about this. So just a little bit on sort of how we uncovered this story. So Sho had found this program, Christian Alcoholics, Addicts in Recovery, and from just some previous news clips, we knew that people in this program had to work, but we still weren't aware of all of the specifics of how many hours they had to work, what the details were of the work, the specific plants. So that was sort of one of our first questions, was where are people in the program working? We sort of figured this out through a variety of ways. One of them, I know that was really useful, was the website Topics, which often has pretty salacious, sometimes conspiracy theories, but it's a great reporting tool. So I know that we had combed through Topics and found a lot of people said, this is a slave camp. They're making us work in these chicken processing plants. So we had a little bit of an idea that people were working at chicken farms. And then from there, I think this story, probably more than any other story that I've worked on, really was very reliant on social media. One of the biggest problems that we had, sort of a reporting challenge, was finding people who had gone to this drug rehab program and seeing what their experience was like. So we had a lot of these court dockets, but we kept on hitting sort of a brick wall and reaching out to people who were listed in the dockets as being ordered to this program. So Facebook actually ended up being the key to uncovering most of this. So Shoshana and I both just looked at Christian Alcoholics and Addicts in Recovery's Facebook page and looked at anyone who had liked the page, checked in there, commented, and just sent them Facebook friend requests and messaged them and asked them what their experience was like in the program. So we ended up, I think, in the course of several months, probably created our own list. We would be Facebook friends with them, and the moment you have 3 mutual friends of this person in rural Oklahoma, I'm from California, like it was a pretty clear sign that someone had gone through this program. So that was really, I think, the key for this. It was incredibly source heavy of talking to people who had gone through the program and learning about some of the experiences there and some of the more abusive things. So it was talking to people in the program that we kept on hearing this recurring theme, which was that people were forced to work for free in really dangerous jobs in chicken processing plants, but also that injuries were incredibly common and the costs of getting injured in the program were pretty severe. We heard time and time again that people said that as they were working along an assembly line in the chicken processing plant, that their hands would get crushed. They would get these incredibly serious injuries of doors falling on them, hands getting caught in machines, broken bones, a variety of injuries. But they were forced to keep working, or if they got hurt, they would get sent to prison. But much of this was anecdotal, and a lot of the people that we talked to had just heard this secondhand or couldn't remember the names of people who this had actually happened to. So we made that one of our priorities for reporting. And the way that we ultimately ended up finding people who were injured in the program was combing through workers' comp lawsuits for the drug rehab program. And that actually took us a little bit of time to figure out, because initially we had been looking at workers' comp records for the company, Simmons Foods, where people were working, the actual chicken plant. And it turns out that many of these rehab programs have an arrangement with the companies where they are working, where the rehab actually carries workers' comp coverage. So we requested all of that and just got the names of people who had been injured in the program, and had a lot of luck reaching out to those people. And that our reporting ended up bearing out what we had heard, that when people were injured in the program, they were often sent to prison because they could no longer work and pay for their stay in the rehab program. So one of the things in our reporting also was to figure out, there were a variety of different things we were trying to figure out, since these rehabs sort of operate in this space where they connect to the criminal justice system, they connect to the probation system, they connect to the Department of Health, and it encompasses a variety of different areas. So we ended up just sending public records requests to any agency that might touch this rehab program. So when we were trying to figure out for a part of it, a big part of it was that people, like Shoshana had mentioned, mainly enter this program because they are court ordered from drug courts in Oklahoma. And we were curious if courts knew about what was happening in the program. Talking to some court experts, they said, we love this program because it is teaching people a work ethic, and it's hard work and faith, and it's not costing taxpayers any money. This is great. And when we talked to participants, they had said this is incredibly abusive. They were not getting any sort of counseling, any sort of treatment. It was just nonstop work in very dangerous conditions. So as we started to sort of peel back the layer of how is this happening, we sort of went to the basics of Oklahoma's drug court law and saw what the rules were. And there was a rule on the books in Oklahoma, which is true in a variety of other states. I'm not sure what it's like in New Jersey, but many states have rules that drug courts can only send defendants for treatment to licensed and certified drug treatment centers. And the program we were looking at, CARE, Christian Alcoholics, Addicts, and Recovery, was unlicensed and uncertified. Yet we found all of these court dockets where judges were sending people to this program for treatment. And we ended up calling the author of the drug court law, who said, this is illegal. This is not what I meant by this law. I introduced this law specifically for this reason, so there's some oversight of these programs. So we found that many judges were violating the drug court law by sending people to this drug rehab program and many other unlicensed programs like this. So we ultimately ended up publishing our story that had different findings. Many of them were that these people in these programs had been turned into basically modern day indentured servants, where they weren't getting paid, they weren't getting treated to prison, and many judges were violating the law by sending people there. We honestly, before we published the story, when we were talking to variety of stakeholders in Oklahoma, from politicians to judges, everyone sort of said, oh, this is the way it is. It's the way it always has been. This is not a big deal. So we ended up being really surprised when we published the story, and the response was pretty instantaneous, that people, I think the wider public, was horrified at what was going on in these drug rehab centers. And many Oklahoma politicians and judges and court officials seemingly had no idea about really what was going on in these programs. So the judges across the state, many courts across the state, stopped sending people to CARE, and the program was the subject of a variety of class action lawsuits.
AJ, before we move on to the next slide and start talking about the network, I'm wondering if you might be able to talk just very briefly, or show as well, about how this spiraled out of just care and kind of became a beat for you, and some of the other pieces, both shorter and more long form pieces that I've highlighted in this slide, just sort of how it developed into sort of a larger interest area for you.
Yeah, I mean, over the course of reporting on the care story, we heard about other programs that were operating on a similar or identical business model. We learned about a lot in Oklahoma. One judge that we talked to in particular, who we heard about because he was sending people to the care program, had actually started a program of his own called SOAR that was sending people to work at the Coca-Cola bottling plant for no pay. The program was the exact same business model, nonprofit. It's a free program. Anyone can enter. They don't have to pay anything to go, but once they're there, they have to work very long hours for no wages for for-profit companies. And Judge Landreth's, there's a picture of him on the slide up top there. Judge Landreth's feeling on this was, well, it's better than prison, and there's no other place for them to go, and treatment, state subsidized treatment options and more evidence-based treatment options are few and far between, especially in more rural places. And so, he felt like this was the best option for people who didn't have anywhere else to go. I remember we found out, AJ, that the waiting list for state subsidized facilities was 9 months or longer. And people in the criminal justice system, or anyone struggling with substance abuse, simply can't wait that long for a bed. So one thing that AJ touched upon is that as we were learning more about all these different programs across the U.S. and in Oklahoma, most of these are unregulated and unlicensed. So even though there are oftentimes really, really poor living and working conditions, there's not really a state agency that is regularly inspecting these programs or holding them to a standard of treatment. So you could see where there's such little oversight or any standard for counseling or treatment, that there could be the potential for exploitation and abuse. So when we wrote about Judge Landreth's program, the immediate impact was that Coca-Cola told the plant to cancel their contract with the rehab program. We also found that this is a trend across these programs that we've been looking at, that the program was having people sign up for food stamps as soon as they entered the program, and then taking those food stamps and using them to purchase food. In some cases, we found that food goes to program participants. In other cases, we found that the rehab takes their food stamps and uses it for food they purchase for themselves. And Amy Julia will talk about one program that did that. But in either case, there are specific federal regulations that dictate how and when a rehab can utilize people's food stamps to purchase food. And we found potentially that SOAR was violating federal law on that. So immediately after that story came out, Coca-Cola canceled that contract, and sorry about the train. An investigation was launched into the potential misuse of food stamp fraud. We did some other stories. You'll see at the bottom left, there's a story, top Arkansas politician uses labor from rehab work camp. We found that there was another rehab program called DARP that was sending people to work at for-profit companies for free. One of those companies was actually a company belonging to Arkansas Senate Majority Leader. And he's someone who publicly had been very, had been touting how his great role as a job creator, how with his business that he was running, he was creating jobs for Arkansas citizens. Well, in fact, a lot of his jobs were taken up by these rehab workers who weren't receiving any compensation for their work, who were working very long hours, and who often got injured and received very little by way of medical care. In fact, that was another trend that we saw with some of these programs that we looked into, that rehab participants who were injured on the job were often told, well, if you want more medical treatment for your injury, or if you can't work because you're injured, you're getting kicked out, and oftentimes getting kicked out of these programs results in a prison sentence. So people were really felt pressured and compelled to work through all conditions, even if they were injured, for fear of being sent to prison. And then we also learned about another program in North Carolina, and Amy Julia can tell you more about that one.
Yeah, like Shoshana and Byard had both mentioned, many of these programs are unregulated, and there's a lot more going on than just unpaid work. So it could be a great target for an investigation, because a lot of the people who are running these drug rehab programs that are unregulated have histories of fraud, abuse, and are skimming off the top or breaking the rules in a variety of different ways. And that ended up being true for this program that we had written about in North Carolina. And we were interested in this program in particular called Recovery Connections Community because of the type of work that participants were doing. This drug rehab program was having recovering heroin addicts, opioid addicts, working for free in assisted living facilities and adult care homes for elderly and disabled patients. And just that fact alone sort of seemed concerning, and we wanted to learn more about it, and ended up that sort of often the worst case scenario of what you can imagine ends up being true. And in this case, what we ended up finding was that participants in this drug rehab program were working for free in these adult care homes and were tasked with dispensing medications, often pain pills, in violation of state law. And unsurprisingly, these rehab workers would steal drugs from the assisted living facilities, from the elderly and disabled patients. We heard cases where people were ripping fentanyl pain patches off of elderly patients and like sucking them in the bathroom on the job. And then more seriously, we heard of different cases where these rehab participants had been accused of sexually assaulting elderly and disabled patients in some of these homes. So that was sort of just the tip of the iceberg for the harm that can happen in some of these job arrangements. What we had found across the country is that many of these businesses and job sites that partner with rehab centers like this are looking for a way to get cheap workers, and they're often in industries that people don't necessarily want to work in. So chicken processing plants in Oklahoma, like the overnight shift, they were having trouble finding workers, so they turned to care. In North Carolina, these were sort of bottom of the barrel assisted living facilities that had histories of problems, who were looking for low wage workers and often willing to break the rules and compromise on safety and training. And then the rehab owner herself, who ran Recovery Connections Community, had a history of problems. She had run a licensed drug treatment center, but had her license revoked after she was embezzling money and sleeping with a client. She lost her therapy license, and then almost overnight started this unregulated drug treatment program that was used by the courts and probation officers, and just had a history of problems. What we found, this is where these types of programs can spawn a lot of fraud in different directions. We found out there was a lot going on at Recovery Connections community that had to do with sort of charity and solicitation problems and potentially fraud, where the owner of the drug rehab center would have participants, in addition to working at the care homes, calling hair salons and manicure places and Nike and all of these big name brands to solicit donations. And they would say, oh yeah, can you donate a haircut or donate some shoes to people in a drug rehab program for recovery? And these businesses would donate goods and services, and then the rehab owner and her husband would keep all of the donations and kind of live large. And they had a history of fraud in this respect. There were also some food stamp fraud issues where this drug rehab program also ran a cafe and had people in the rehab working in the cafe, but we had heard that the cafe was buying food with participants' drug rehab with their food stamps and then selling it to the public, which is illegal. So we wrote about that as well. And there were a variety of problems in this place, including, one drug rehab center owner who had been accused of sexually assaulting and harassing female participants in this drug rehab program. So that's just to say that there's a ton there, and this type of model, particularly when it's unregulated, can be really ripe for a ton of different stories. So in these cases as well, once we published the stories, there was a class action lawsuit and a variety of state investigations into the program.
Totally. Thank you guys so much. I really liked what Julia said right at the end there, which is that like the way that, you find one of these rehabs and then just all the different spiraling directions of malfeasance, whether it's fraud, food stamp fraud, whether it's the personal history of the founder and whether or not they had tried rehabs in the past and got their license revoked. Like, this is something, it can be a little overwhelming from a reporting standpoint, but this is definitely something we see again and again. It's like you just scratch the surface and then it's almost like you don't even know where to go.
Right. And I think
in all these different directions.
And I think also like, there really are so few free or affordable treatment options for people. So a lot of these places have what appear to be very stellar reputations. But if they're operating along this business model, there is it seems to be, based on our reporting, a greater potential for abuse. So even if it appears that a program has a good reputation, it's worth doing your due diligence and looking into it to find out if that's actually the case.
Yeah, and you guys have heard from various folks, even about these rehabs that you've shown to be deeply problematic. Some people come to you and they say, this rehab saved my life. This was the best thing that happened to me. But I think it's important to remember that those success stories don't necessarily rationalize breaking the law. There's a way to do this correctly, and that's sort of what your reporting has gestured at.
So, Byard, in the interest of time here, I'm hoping, I know this is amazing, but let's talk about how we can work together on this, because I know a lot of folks on here are interested in that. I've advanced to the next slide. You let me know when I need to keep going.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm gonna go through my slides very quickly so that we have a little bit of time for questions and for more of a dialogue about this. Long story short, in my role as engagement reporter, as these big stories were coming out, we knew that we were kind of scratching the surface of something larger. People would write us on Twitter and Facebook. They would email Amy, Julia, and Shoshana, and they, the common refrain was like, "Oh man, you thought that place was bad. Wait till you hear my story about this other place in Montana, or this other place in North Carolina, or whatever." So as the months wore on, we decided we were going to start collecting these tips in a screen door form, which is basically kind of like a Google form that has a little bit more capability on the back end. And we got close to 100 tips from across the country, sort of on the momentum of each of Amy, Julia, and Shoshana's stories. Our next step was to, next slide, please, Joe. Our next step was to build what we came to call the Rehab Reporting Network. And basically this was a way for us to share out to build a repository of local journalists and to share out the tips and the information that we had collected about rehabs that we probably would never get around to investigating, not because there wasn't something there, but because literally there are dozens and dozens of them. So we launched in August of 2018. And since then, we've signed up about 175 reporters, and there are more than a dozen stories in progress now in various parts of the country. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Can we go back one? Some of you I've seen have already signed up for the network. If you go to revealnews.org/network, you can do it. It's very easy. And what you get is, first of all, you get access to all of our tips, which there are 2 in New Jersey, and there are many others, across the U.S. You get a reporting guide that sort of synthesizes what Amy, Julia, and Shoshana talked about, and also offers insights into how to approach subjects, what the right approach for filing public records requests are, the right state agencies to start with, things like that. And then of course you get our publishing guidelines, which are, there's some crediting language to Reveal, but also one thing we're doing is stipulating that when partners publish a story, they embed the form that collects tips, so we can kind of keep the tip cycle going and keep feeding tips back into the network on the strength of others reporting. If we can go to the next slide. So far, these stories take time. And so we launched in November we launched in August, and in December, the first major investigation from partners landed. It was from State Impact Oklahoma and the Frontier, and it was about a program called First Step in Oklahoma City. And former clients of the First Step work recovery program told the reporters that the program kept or attempted to take a portion of their disability benefits from workers' compensation insurance after they were injured on the job, among many other problematic things. So it didn't take long for impact, as these stories tend to go. It didn't take long for some impact. Local politicians, after the story came out, vowed to pay close attention to a federal investigation that was actually already underway of First Step. And they're now poised to take action on any ruling that comes down from the federal level. That's one example. By my estimation, based on communications with others in the network, the 2 closest investigations to come out soon are going to come out of North Carolina and Washington State. So this gets us to this, this small cohort of New Jersey journalists that we've gathered here today. So Joe, if you could go to the next slide. Basically, here's my hard sell to you, to local reporters in New Jersey. So far in the network, on the publicly available spreadsheet, we have 2 tips about New Jersey. One was claimed by a Huffington Post reporter right when we started, but I just touched base with her recently, and she had to forfeit it, essentially because the tempo of her work, she's like a blogger, and she blogs about the opioid crisis. She said she was definitely getting good, sort of making good progress, but is willing to open it back up to local reporters. That particular tip is about a facility called Hogar Cray, which actually Latino USA just did another expose on Hogar Cray, not in New Jersey, but in Puerto Rico. And so I was very encouraged to see that Latino USA story come out, because it led me further to believe that, perhaps some of the complaints that are coming in about the facility in Jersey are going to be warranted. There's another tip, I'm forgetting the name of the facility, but it seems equally promising. And so obviously, we've gathered a pretty, sizable collection of New Jersey journalists here today. And, you can very easily just sign up for the network and get the typical benefits that anyone who signs up can get, and you can jump in and claim one of those New Jersey tips. But one thing that I had talked about with Stephanie and Joe, and that we're really excited about here, is the sort of top-down approach that Reveal has used for the reporting network, which is to say, we're sort of like the holder of the tips and sort of the ones sort of seeking more tips based on the strength of Amy, Julia, and Show's reporting. we got to wondering if we had buy-in from the very beginning from local newsrooms, not just to chase down the tips that we already have in their area, but actually to put calls out for tips, whether on their social channels, in their newsletters, through blog posts, through even in-person engagement initiatives. How many new tips in a specific area might we net? And so that's sort of what I'm coming here to sort of pitch to everyone today. So definitely join the network. Definitely take a look at those New Jersey tips. I sincerely hope that that you're interested in reporting those two out. But furthermore, I'm hoping to connect with reporters and editors here today to start a sort of more grassroots from the ground of actually putting call outs for new tips and for new leads using the form we've created. And then from my perspective, manager of the form, sharing those tips, not the full network, but just to the New Jersey network, so that there's a little bit more of a hands-on approach between Reveal and between these local reporters. And my hope is, yes, that we report out, members of this New Jersey court report out those two tips in New Jersey, but also we're working to sort of collect more tips about the presence of work-based rehabs and some of the problems accompanying them in New Jersey. And so if I can connect with reporters and editors today, I would love to work hand in hand with them to kind of craft language and craft a strategy for call-outs, for local call-outs, that then may net us more of those leads as well. Part of what every network participant gets after they complete their story is sort of a more hands-on social outreach plan with Reveal. We promote your stories, we feature you in our newsletter, and also, there's a possibility that if you wanted to pitch Reveal, the actual show, with your story, to do a radio piece about it, there's a little bit of priority given to members of the Rehab Reporting Network as we approach more, more reporting on the radio about this. There's also a Slack channel that I've created for all network participants. I intend to create a New Jersey specific Slack channel. Amy, Julia, and Sho can sort of attest that, it's been helpful as reporters get close to deadline, when they hit a snag or when they need advice. We're available on that Slack channel to give you help and to answer any of the questions that you may have about the reporting process itself. So that's sort of the pitch to everyone here, is like, we've seen time and time again through Amy, Julia, and Sho's reporting that, when we get a tip about these stories, it's just a question in many cases of digging to find what's going wrong here. We know there are a couple in New Jersey. We suspect there are more. We're looking for your help, both identifying them, but then of course also reporting them out. And we can offer insights, and we can offer sort of guidance on how the best approach, what the best approaches might be to reporting on this topic. You'll get it from both myself and Amy, Julia, and Sho. And then we want to promote your stories as part of this larger initiative when they come out, on social and in our newsletter. And I think, in the interest of saving time, we can skip over to next steps. I may have already covered some of these, but please, if you're interested in at all, sign up at revealnews.org/network, both yourself and your editors. I think one thing I'm learning, having managed this network for a few months now, is that it's important for me to be interfacing with editors as well, just so they can understand sort of what they're getting into and some successes we've seen in the past. I'm going to make a special section, a special separate micro network of just New Jersey folks. And I think that's where I'll put any tips that come in from your outreach efforts. And also I'll make a special New Jersey Slack channel so that if there are Jersey-specific journalists who have questions as they're reporting on this issue, we can be available to answer those questions. And then again, it's the story, the reporting and sharing cycle and Reveal's promotion, boosting of you, whether that's just on social or if we can find a way to do a radio piece about it as well. That's part of the deal as well. So I think without further ado, and in the interest of kind of having this be a dialogue and to answer any questions, I think that's all I've got. And I would love to open it up for questions from the group about any questions you have, if you're interested, what next steps should be.
Okay, so there's ways we can do this. You can ask your question in the chat, or you can click one of the buttons in the participants area to raise your hand, I'll just click the yes check mark if you have a question, or you can use one of the hands I'm watching. You should be able to unmute yourself if you want to just jump in, but I just don't want everybody talking all over each other. Seems like we have a question in, do we have any questions in the chat yet? Not yet. Steve Lubetkin says, I'm on the Reveal site, but I can't find the tip spreadsheet.
The tip spreadsheet you get access to immediately once you sign up at revealnews.org/network. So how that works is you sign up on the left button that basically says join the network. That dumps you into it's a Google form. It alerts me. I send you an email immediately that has all of the publishing guidelines as well as a link to the spreadsheet.
Eleanor wants to know if you've tried looking at the New Jersey court records for leads already. And Steve, I see your question there. We'll work with you individually if you're having trouble getting the access to it. But yeah, just look for that email. But yeah, have you tried looking at New Jersey court records for additional leads?
Good question for Amy, Julia, and Show.
No, sorry, Amy, Julia, if you wanted to jump in. We have not started looking at New Jersey court records. I think that would be a great place to start, for sure. Just asking, court officials, judges, sometimes drug courts have particular administrators who are in charge of kind of placing people or assessing them, social workers who work with the courts. These would all be great sources to try to cultivate to figure out where courts are sending people. And they may also have contracts or lists or other ways of providing you with that information.
I see the email from Steve Lubetkin. Steve, did you just sign up during this webinar?
Seems like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you did.
Yeah, it's not automated, so I have to do it, which is the reason that you didn't get full access just yet. But I'll be sure to do that as soon as we jump off the.
Anybody else? Okay, Steve, it looks like you're good.
I'm seeing a concern from Kimmy Way. It's not easy to sign up since the sign up asks for a description of stories we have worked on. I'm not sure what you're referring
Kim,
to.
I'm going to unmute you, Kimmy. Go ahead. What's your question there? Oh, I guess you muted yourself. There you go.
Yeah. So when I went to that page and I was looking to sign up to the network, so I found a form. That was the only thing I found. A form that asked me a lot of information about a story that I have worked on, relative to this issue. So I just put NA in the boxes I didn't have an answer to, but I didn't find an open sign up.
That's so strange. I'm not sure what you're referring to. You went to revealnews.org/network?
Yep.
That's so weird. I need to look into that because the form is very basic. The form is just like, hey, what's your name? I'm pretty sure. Let me just double check real quick.
Okay.
You go to join the network. Yeah, you should just go to revealnews.org/network. You go down, click the button on the far left that says join the network, and that takes you to a Google form that asks for name, email address, news outlet, state, and whether you want to be part of our Slack channel. And that's it. And you submit that, and that pings me automatically, and that's how I know to sign you up further, to give you full access.
I will note one thing. It took me, it's one of those moments where I just had like a brain fart when I was looking at that site for about 10 minutes trying to find the buttons and my eyes just glossed right over those 3 green squares thinking that they were like additional story. And I didn't even though I know it is in giant letters, but they don't necessarily look like buttons. So yeah, Kimmy, yeah. Okay, so same thing. Okay.
Right. I didn't even see.
I did the same thing. I was like, I don't get it. What is it? And then I saw that those tiles were buttons. Okay.
I'm here to tell you. That's how you sign up. I'm sorry, everyone.
Yes,
okay, cool. All-righty. Kimmy, I'm going to go ahead and mute you now. Anybody else have anything else they want to add or ask? While we're waiting, I'm blown away. I knew these stories were heartbreaking and sad, but the one where you get injured and then you go to jail because of that, I think somebody said in the chat they're really interested in the Slack channel, so that would be good. I think there was somebody in the state named Gavin Rossi who developed this tool to file public records requests and track them very quickly called Oprah Machine. So if you're not aware, the Open Public Records Act is our FOIA in New Jersey. And so we might even reach out to him, and his also allows you to search public records requests that have been filed in the past. So I might want to connect you with Gavin and see if there's some kind of way that you guys can work together there. I'm not seeing any other questions or indications in the chat or the member list here. Assuming that there are none, or maybe if you have one and you haven't answered, you can do three of you. I'll put your emails in the chat, and I put your contact information on the email I sent, the reminder. Is there anything else that we may have missed before we let everybody go? We're just about 9 minutes before the top of the hour now.
One thing that I just want to raise is that I'm remembering now that I have one additional there's one New Jersey tip in the public spreadsheet, which is available to be taken. And then there's another I have not yet added, so I'm going to add that today. One issue that we've run across, I just want to be candid about, we've come across with just one time so far in the network, but there is, there's a degree of competition for tips sometimes, depending on sort of your location or, the willingness to pursue the tip. These tips are on a first come, first served basis. My hope, again, is that through closer collaboration with this sort of this more localized cohort of newsrooms, we accumulate enough tips so that each newsroom is sort of occupied with their own tip. But those additional tips, additional to the two that we have now, won't come in until we've started like a coordinated campaign to collect more leads in New Jersey. And that's what I'm hoping I can connect with you and your editors on to sort of craft a strategy for that. In the meantime, there's one tip on the spreadsheet. As soon as I can, I'm going to add the other tip. I will add you all to a sort of a more specialized spreadsheet where it's just the New Jersey cohort. And then again, if I can connect with you and your editors to speak a little bit about what I think is the most exciting push, the most exciting step that I haven't been able to do with the broader network, which is to start a campaign of collecting tips. Because how that will work is those tips will come to me. I won't be the only one with access to them, but then I will share them out, not to the whole network, but just to the New Jersey network. So
and you're going to clean all that up. You're going to make it presentable for them and everything. My question is, because there's such a scarcity, well, first, I guess, going into a little bit more how that tip claiming process would work, and if it's a claim, and then on top of that, are there ways where maybe the center could facilitate a sharing of reporting on that? I know a lot of the smaller newsrooms maybe don't have a lot of resources, and maybe they'll be, one of them is really great at video and multimedia, but the other one, has great editor.
Absolutely. And in fact, the first story to come out of this network, the one that I cited in the presentation, they took care of that collaboration on their own. So the Frontier, which is a nonprofit investigative newsroom in Oklahoma, and State Impact Oklahoma, the two reporters, I don't know how they did, they just worked it out on their own. Joe Wirtz is a radio reporter. Brianna Bailey is a print reporter. I think they just, without even telling me, got together and decided that they wanted to do a radio component and a print component. They're co-bylined on both. And from what I've heard from them, it was a very positive experience. And of course, it got on NPR thanks to the radio reporting component. So yes, absolutely. I fully encourage collaboration in that way, whether it's just straight up co-reporting, we have two reporters on this, or whether it's a more sort of medium specific co-reporting, like one person wants to do a short doc, video doc, another person wants to do a text story, or another person wants to do an audio doc. I deeply, deeply encourage that, and we've seen nothing but great and cool things come from that.
And then as far as the possible collaboration with the Reveal show, I know the university, we have a fully operational recording and audio, broadcast studio here. So at least for the folks in the northern part of the state, they will have access to our professional microphones and audio board and everything like that, if that's something that may ease the process of getting them on the air if we find a good one. I don't know so much about the South Jersey folks, maybe WHYY we can partner with, but just throwing that out there as well. I think we have, Catherine says, is the network solely focused on work-based rehabs, meaning unpaid labor, or are there other abusive practices that are potentially included?
This is a great question. At Reveal, yes. The beat that Amy, Julia, and Shoshana have developed is specifically about rehabs that force residents to work for free. We don't know yet what we're going to find in New Jersey. I know that there are 2 leads that we have that seem very promisingly to show that this is an issue there, and that there are work-based rehabs that are problematic there. And in fact, that one of them has already been investigated in another state by Latino USA. Like that's something I know for sure. Are we open to sort of promoting, collaboration about rehabs in New Jersey that are otherwise problematic? I think that that's an open question. I think I wouldn't want to say no to it yet, but at the same time, this specific project we have is about work-based rehabs. And I think the first step I would want to take would be to make sure we all, as a sort of micro network in New Jersey, all have a great understanding of how pervasive this specific problem is in New Jersey, and use that as a starting point. And if we find that there are just 2 and we report on both of them, and there are investigations launched, and the problem goes away, but there are other problematic rehabs, I think that that's something we'd certainly be open to continuing to collaborate on. Right now, I'm not even sure how many work-based rehabs are in New Jersey, and I think that's our most pressing question.
Well, and I just want to add that that no one has, we have these tips, none of them have been vetted, no one has really looked into them. It could be that the rehabs that are on our tip spreadsheet are not problematic or are not doing anything wrong. So I think it just is incumbent upon some reporters to take a look and see if there's anything going on there.
I will say, though, that the reason the tips made it to the tip spreadsheet is because it's an anecdotal story. It's a rehab that's there in New Jersey, and it's also an anecdotal story from someone saying, like, this rehab is horrible and it's a slave camp. So
I would also just add, Byard, that Shoshana and I, in the course of our reporting as well, are attempting to map and quantify this issue all over the country. So, in the coming months, we're going to have more definitive information on, through our own reporting, on probably the number, or at least a minimum number, that are going to be in New Jersey and all of these other states as well, and would be happy to share tips as we continue that. This is just the baseline of tips that have come in, but there'll definitely be more.
Yeah, I think what both your comments and mine sort of underscore is that there's work to be done on the tip collection front as well. And I think having a small but powerful cohort of local reporters and local newsrooms who can actually help accumulate those tips is going to be really critical for the success of this project at the local level.
Last thing before we jump, I want to make sure that we are all aware also of making sure that our call outs and our solicitation of these kind of tips also find ways to penetrate into communities of color and low income communities where, I don't know, certainly the center doesn't have deep roots and connections in those communities. And by that nature, you see that our connections that we brought to this call aren't all necessarily in those communities. So I just want to make sure that we take that into account. And maybe if anyone has organizations that they tend to partner with in order to reach out to these communities, that's something also we want to keep in mind. And I think, Kimmy, is there going to be any gathering of info for formerly incarcerated people specifically?
There are some programs that take in people via the criminal justice court system prior to sentencing or after sentencing. And so a lot of people who end up in these programs are on probation or had a split sentence. Maybe they were sent to prison or jail and then released and ordered by the court to complete these programs. There are also a lot of halfway houses and sober living homes that operate in a similar manner, requiring people to participate in unpaid labor. So there definitely, I could see some overlap between these types of rehab programs and people who were previously incarcerated. I don't think that's necessarily the specific lens we're looking at this problem through, but it definitely is, there's overlap.
Okay. I think that just about wraps it up. We're at the top of the hour now. Again, I'm going to send out a follow-up email. I'm going to include the link to the video, the full video and audio from today's session, the link to the slides, a link to the file with all of the chat that will be saved with everything in there. And I'll also include everyone, all of our wonderful facilitators' email and contact information as well. Thank you, the three of you. I appreciate you taking the time to share this project with us. Thank you to everybody who showed up on this call. Please feel free to share this with other reporters who you might think might be interested. And just the more sort of critical mass we can get on this, the more powerful I think the reporting will end up being in the long run. As always, the center is here as a resource if anyone needs help on technical issues or collaborative stuff. And I look forward to hearing more about how this unfolds.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Great.
you guys.
Thanks,
Appreciate
everyone.
Take care.
Bye.